And so as Nigeria navigates these turbulent times, it is crucial to understand the legal framework surrounding sedition and how it intersects with citizens' rights to express their dissatisfaction with governance. The complex interplay between national security and civil liberties poses significant questions about the future of protests and public dissent in Nigeria. And so joining us today to unpack these legal intricacies is Dr. Ayodeji Awobiyide. He is a legal consultant and litigation expert, and he joins us live in the studio. Welcome to the program.
Welcome. Good to have you here.
Thank you for having me.
I really was looking forward to this conversation with you because we had an instance from yesterday.
He's been itching.
It was a very interesting one. Sedition is a very interesting term. And when you put sedition right next to treason, I don't know when you're getting out of jail. We had a conversation yesterday with Mr. Omolaye Shore, and we talked about the use of the Nigerian flag, or rather the use of the Russian flag in the protests in the north, and we refer to it as treason. As a lawyer, please would you clarify, is it treason to hoist the flag, not one of that nation, and also while burning that of that sovereign nation? What is that exactly?
I would say straight off that you are correct and Shower was wrong. That itself is treason. Okay, so when you do any act that is aimed at overthrowing your government, that is aimed at ensuring that you have some other foreign intervention in your society to basically overthrow the government of the day, then that's treason. So it's not sedition.
So one has to ask then, what are the legal implications of seeing that situation that we saw during the protests where certain Nigerians in Kaduna and Kano State were waving their flags? What's the legal implications on that?
So what ordinarily should happen is that they should be arrested and charged to court for treason or treasonable felony. And of course, the punishment for that, for treason, is death.
Wow, that's serious.
Wait, what?
Yes, so for treason, the punishment is death. It's death penalty.
Oh, you're looking at me, I'm looking at him.
Yes, that's what the law says.
Now, that's how serious that is. Now,
yes.
Coming to sedition. Sedition is when you arouse using sentiment or whatever it is that you use. As long as you arouse a group of people to go against the governance, that's sedition. Am I correct?
Yes, you're correct to the extent that sedition deals with the freedom of expression. So ideally, it's a colonial law that was passed to ensure that people were kept, suppressed by the colonial government. And it's since found its way into our laws now, such that it relates to any act of inciting, of causing disaffection or ill will against the government of the day. So for instance, journalists usually have these charges, basically hanging on their heads every time they write. And of course, the courts have had to deal with it, particularly in the case of DPP and Chike Obi, when he wrote an article basically calling about, the bad governance at the time. That's during the 1960, 63, 66 period. And so these days, when journalists also write, they are also basically walking a thin line between freedom of expression and ill will against the government.
How thin is that line?
It's very thin, very thin, because the Constitution guarantees the right to freedom of expression. It's your fundamental right, it's guaranteed. So that means if the government is not doing well, like, almost everybody can feel that this government, is not doing as well as they should be doing, or as it promised to deliver on its promises, then people are within their rights to complain about how bad things have turned out.
I have to ask you, because we're pressed for time, during the protests, watching those Nigerians wave the flag, and use insignia that is very foreign and not of Nigeria, one has to ask the question about, whether it can be legally interpreted as foreign interference or influence, right? So I'm going to make you ruminate on that, think about it, and then, give us your answer.
We have to go to sports
because we're about
now.
to get to sports very quickly. So we're going to take a very short break to bring you sports. But again, the question is, can it be legally interpreted as interference or influence? Ruminate on that. We'll take a short break where we bring you sports. We have Favor Itwan on standby. Stay with us.
And that's all the headlines this hour here inside of Breakfast Extra. We have our special guest here as we discuss the law of sedition. So I'm just going to go right back into the studio with our guest and, of course, Judith here with us.
Yes, indeed. Our guest today is Dr. Ayodeji Awobiyide. He is a legal consultant and litigation expert, and we'll be talking about sedition and the Russian flag that we saw being flown or hoisted during the hashtag End Bad Governance protests. Now, a day after the 10 days planned protest, we saw what I didn't think would have ever happened in Nigerian history. And before the news and, of course, the sports news, I asked a question, which is, from a legal standpoint, seeing that being hoisted, would that be interpreted as influenced or interference?
Oh, thank you for the question. I wouldn't say that the interference from Russia. Most likely, it's what you have politicians at play, trying to seize the opportunity to protest against the government of the day. Don't forget that we already have a government that was elected democratically, whether or not we like the outcome. So no Nigerian, because Nigeria is a sovereign state, no Nigerian should threaten the sovereignty of the country through such overt acts of hoisting the flag of a foreign nation in Nigeria and then adding that the government must go. I mean, if you watch the video, you would hear people say, oh, Tinubu must go, and just basically trying to incite people against the government. So I honestly would not say Russia, and of course, you've seen the Russian government, the ambassador has sent a message saying that they are basically not involved in any of it, so just to clarify that position. So it's the politicians at play, and I think that the DSS and the relevant agencies of the government should go ahead and fish out those elements. I read a report that the tailors who were sewing the flags have been arrested. Other people who also involved have been arrested. So the government should go ahead and do the needful. And don't forget that for treason, you need to bring the charge against such people within 2 years of the offense. In other words, if you don't bring the action between now and 2 years' time, you can't bring it again. So they need to go after them and send a clear message, because you will notice that the engagement with the Russian flag was basically mostly in the north. I didn't see any of such in the south. So, and this also undermines why people usually are very wary of protests in Nigeria, because if you have a protest, it should be peaceful ordinarily, but there are elements who always want to seize the opportunity to cause havoc and to wreak mayhem in society.
I'm glad you said that, because one thing we've seen with protests, especially, I'll always use the Arab Spring Uprising, is that it really set the stage for interference when it comes to geopolitics and those who have, selfish interest in interfering that as well. I mean, I've asked this question, and I will ask you from a legal standpoint and seeing history, because history is a lesson. We must learn from history. How best can peaceful protesters protest and it not being encroached on, by foreign elements who have their selfish interests and use that as a center stage to carry out their own master plan?
Very good question. I think that for protests in Nigeria, because the history is quite clear, like you've said, about how it's been hijacked at different stages, is for the government to create an enabling environment, in other words, without fear or intimidation, to say, okay, well, I'm going to offer you protection to protest. So if the government officials or government agencies, law enforcement are present, once they see the flags being handed out, they can easily apprehend the persons who are in charge of handing out the flags, and then do their investigation and prosecute. But if you are not present and you allow these people who have the desire to cause havoc or to wreak mayhem in society the freedom to do as they please, then you'll be handicapped. And you saw that with the protests in the north, because you had fewer policemen and you had people who were largely out there protesting, but they had flags. Hungry, actually, yes, but hungry and angry. Because, I mean, this issue really, it is across board, across all classes of society. So it's not just about the poor.
Well, but let me jump in there. You mentioned the word poor. These people are being, let me use your word, influenced to carry these flags and all. They're being taken advantage of. Their hunger is being taken advantage of. What responsibility, or whose responsibility is it to make people, the populace, know that this is treason, this is sedition? Because you said a statement here that even surprised both of us, noting that the penalty for treason is actually death. That was surprising. I'm sure it's surprising to a lot of people watching. Whose responsibility is it to let the people know? Because if I'm hungry, less educated, and I find someone who perhaps maybe says, hey, to do this or to put food on your table, do this. Am I going to get food? Yes. Okay, fine. I'm going to do it. they're being influenced. Whose responsibility?
So ignorance of the law is no excuse. So that you did not know that a law exists, it doesn't excuse your
I
actions.
hear that all the time from traffic agents. Like a guy don't pass one way. It's not.
Yes. So the law is there. The law is there. It's there. It's been there for. It's been there since I was born. It's been there forever. The law of treason. It's there. The penalty, the punishment is there. But it's more about education, legal education. Any people know what we're doing now is legal education for those who are listening. That if you engage in these actions, it's like you know the punishment for it is quite clear. It's like somebody gives you a gun because you are angry and you're hungry and says, "Take this gun, go and wield it at the bus stop." That in itself, I mean.
But then again, a gun is. I mean, you understand what I mean? A gun is a weapon.
It's a gun.
It's a gun. A gun is a gun.
Yeah.
If I saw that, I'm like, there's something wrong with this.
Exactly.
And I'm not educated.
A foreign flag.
Like a foreign flag, and I'm not educated. I'm
Yes.
like, okay, it's just ordinary cloth, Nabi.
Yes.
I might do that. So what you're saying is that if the law of the land was to follow its full extent,
Yes.
those ignorant people, those poor, ignorant, hungry people who hoisted the flag, if the law was supposed to go its full extent, would they be, what's the word? Would they be sentenced to death?
Okay, so in criminal law, there are two important elements that need to happen before you can say a person can be guilty of an offense. The first one is called the mens rea. The mens rea, that's the mental element of the offense, that you knowingly did what you did. The other one is the actus reus, which is the action itself. Now, for a lot of those people who hoisted the flag, the foreign flag of Russia and Nigeria, the action is there, but they didn't know what they were doing. Is the question that needs to be answered, the mental element of the offense. So that's where the prosecution would need to be able to establish that they knew that what they were doing was actually to incite the people against the government, to call for an overthrow of the government. So if they did not know, for instance, like those children that had the flags with them, they will be detained at the pleasure of the president in the interim until an investigation as to whether they knew. So once you are not able to establish that they knew what they were doing, that in other words, they did not know that by hoisting the flag, they had no intention to call for an overthrow of the government, then that's different. But there were those who actively knew what they were doing. Those who gave interviews to other stations who were reported as having said that the government needs to go and that Russia needs to intervene in the current economic situation of Nigeria. Those ones knew what they were doing.
The law, you said that the trickles of our sedition law as well as the treasonable laws that we have in our law and constitution were elements that were borrowed from the colonial time. So how then can we restructure or redo our law? What's the word that I'm looking for? Potential reforms of our law to ensure that it aligns with our democratic values.
Okay, so the first one, as it relates to sedition, you know that the government, that's the weapon that the government has to protect itself.
A bit deliberate.
From journalists, and because if you didn't have the law of sedition, for instance, I mean, you could write anything about the government and get away with it, and you will say it's free speech. But what the Supreme Court has said is that there's a position for fair criticism. In other words, if you write something about the government and you're being constructive in what you are saying, so you say, oh, this policy that you introduced is not working, but I offer this suggestion as a solution to help the government advance the policy and reform the policy, then that's fair.
Okay.
But when you basically just go to town and with the aim of ensuring that the government is basically not loved by the people anymore, then there's a problem.
Dr. Awobiyide, I want to say thank you for the education.
Oh, yes, indeed.
Because that's a lot, actually. I'm hoping that people will go back and watch.
And also, just be mindful of, if they come and say, no, there's nothing like it.
Your hunger is not an excuse.
It's not. Ignorance is not an excuse.
Hunger is not an excuse.
So don't even try it. Yeah. Anyway, Dr.
Awobiyide,
we appreciate you for doing this with us. Thank you so much for that.
Thank you for having me.